Possible TV. I'm Kris Barney, and I'm excited to have you here with me, as well as my business partner and my husband, Bill Barney. And our episode today is Perfectionism, What's Holding You Back. And I did give you a little teaser in the last episode, if you've watched the last couple of episodes, about how we were going to go into perfectionism and how big of a piece that is in our life, and how that can control us and create a lot of pain in our life and a lot of things to not maybe go as good as we think they are going when we're a perfectionist. I've had some real life experience with this, and so has Bill. And as we've worked with clients, one of the big things that comes up is perfectionism. So we're going to have this episode today for you on that. But before we go into this, I would like to invite you to go to our website at www.allthingspossible.biz and get our 7 traits. Right here on the bottom of the screen you can see the website. We'd like you to get the 7 traits that we teach all the time. Perfectionism is a trait. It's not one of the 7 that we teach, but it is one that we're going to talk about today and give you more information on. Also, while you're on the website, if you would like to get a free strategy session with either Bill or I, today we're going to open it up to either one of us. If you would go to that Contact Us and send an email to us and let us know if you would like to get a free strategy session with Bill for a healing session, or with me for a strategy session in your life. This is one of the things that we love to do. We love to give, and we love to have this for you. So this today is all about perfectionism, and is it holding you back? So I want Bill to share and enlighten you with all of his expertise in this.
Okay, good. I've been excited to do this episode. I've been talking about this for a long time and sharing these principles with clients, that I see one of the big things that's holding people back, this perfectionism and this not letting go of mistakes that they've made in the past, and just they can see flaws in everybody else and be okay with that. But when it's their own flaws, they cannot let go of that. And it's this desire, this perfectionism that is in our society. And so we're going to get right into that here and talk about where that comes from. Okay, perfectionism. I like to refer to it, and many have coined it toxic perfectionism, when perfectionism becomes a negative trait instead of a positive one. And so that's what I want to do, is get into the details of that today. What is it, and where does it come from? Basically, what I've found is that perfectionism generally comes from one of 2 sources, and that is either a combination of, or one of the other, either your parents and your upbringing, or religious influences. Here are some traits of people that are dealing with toxic perfectionism, where it may actually be holding them back. Many times and see if you identify these things in yourself perhaps a little bit, and maybe see some room for improvement, and find something that may be holding you back that you never thought of before. People with toxic perfectionism tend to view their mistakes as failure. It's just like it's a total wipeout. I made a mistake, it's the end, instead of look at it as a learning experience. Another one is people set overly high personal standards. It's a great thing to have personal high standards, but when they're just way too high, that's another problem with this, is we set our expectations way too high, and they're unachievable. Sometimes we feel like our parents are setting very high goals for us, and we have very high parental expectations. You know, that when you come home with a report card, and your parents put a lot more emphasis on the 1 B- that you get, and don't even talk about the 5 or 6 A's, straight A's that you got. That can tend to set a thing in our hearts and in our psyche about having to reach perfect. It has to be perfect to be good enough. So it can come from that too. And maybe your parents were very critical, and you never felt like you could live up to your parents' standards. Nobody will ever be good enough for my child, or nothing is too good for my child. And also another aspect of this is people tend to doubt their own personal ability to accomplish tasks. It's like, I can never do that, because if it's not perfect, it's not done. And so they can't reach that level of perfectionism, and they feel like, well, it's not attainable. And also they can tend to place too much importance on organization and order, and that can also stall people from actually getting in and getting things done. Is too much planning. All of that can be good, but when it's taken to an excess, it can actually be a stumbling block and something that keeps you from moving forward in life. It leads to a fear of failure, and then a fear of making mistakes, and it's very fear-based, and then fear of disapproval. And people get in this and they self-destruct into a spiral, just like circling the drain. We talked about the emotional spiral. But they tend to get into a spiral where first they go up here and they set unreachable goals. Of course, they can't reach them. They fail to achieve the goals. Then they become depressed and lethargic, and they have less energy, and then this deep sense of failure sets in. And with that comes a low self-esteem and a high self-blame. And it's just like circling the drain until it can suck them under, as we talked about. With suicide, we've seen many of those traits with Kris's brother, that he had such a sense of perfectionism that when he didn't reach to his own expectations, he felt like a failure, and it just spiraled him on down, among with other things that were going on. There's nothing wrong with setting high standards and having reachable goals that you can reach with effort. It's good to do that. But it's about being okay with yourself and saying, you know what, that was a mistake. I can live with that. I can learn from it. It's not the end of the world. And that's what we'd like to reach into. I think, so if you identify that you have those traits, or that you are struggling with some of these things, how do you get out of that? Where do you go from there? And that's what I'd like to talk to you about. First, I want to go into the Bible stuff. And if you start freaking out right now, settle down. It's going to be okay. You may not feel an affinity for the Bible or believe in it, but there's a good chance that your parents or your ancestors did. And that heritage and that belief has been passed down, whether you're conscious of it or not, to part of your upbringing through your parents. May not have ever stepped foot inside of a church, but these deeply ingrained beliefs of perfectionism and being perfect. And a lot of that, I think, comes from a misinterpreted passage in the Bible. So I'd like to get into that. If it's not your cup of tea, I just want you to understand that if you didn't get it through your heritage, that a lot of times, a lot of our society is based in that thought process. And I want you to understand where that comes from and talk about that a little bit, and talk to you about what I feel God really expected from us and what was said there. So let's get right into that. First of all, the New Testament was originally written in Greek. Christ spoke Aramaic, which is a language very closely related to Hebrew. But when they wrote the first copies of the New Testament was written, that was written in Greek. It wasn't until almost just 400 years ago that the Bible was first translated into English. They read it in Latin and other languages for many years, but then it was translated into English. And many of the words don't go from one language to another with the exact same meaning. The meaning of the word that Christ used, well, let's go to the passage first. Matthew 5:48, chapter 5, verse 48. And Christ is speaking to his disciple, and he's speaking to he's not speaking to the common folk as much here as some of his closest followers. And he says to them, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as our Father which is in heaven is perfect." Now, perfect means one thing to us: without blemish, this is the mark. This is as high as you can go. Perfect, no blemish, no anything. And we try to reach that perfection, and we fail. None of us can be perfect at everything. We may be perfect at a few things. And then we get well-meaning people that give sermons or talks or talk about, oh, we need to become perfect. And we get this deep sense of failure, like that we can never measure up. And I think that's a lot of what's gone on in our society and in this Christian-based society that formed this country of the United States. And it's come from this, be ye therefore perfect. So I want you to understand a little bit about that. Again, the Bible wasn't translated into English until 400 years ago. The Greek word that Christ used, or the translation of the word that Christ used, Christ used was teleos, okay? And that means to be complete, finished, fully developed, or mature, in the sense that something has grown into what it was intended to be. There's another Greek word for sinless, and that is omertatos. And Jesus did not use that word. He used the word teleos. All right? So you can see where the breakdown is. We have one word that kind of translates in English to both of those, but has two very different meanings. And Christ, he told us work to do better, do a little bit better. But I don't think he expected us to be perfect. It's impossible. He was the only one that was perfect. But he wants us to be mature. So what does that mean? And I want to use an example that I like to use this example when I'm talking to my clients and people that are struggling with letting go of their mistakes of the past about perfection. And perfection is, I can tell a person who may have had a very difficult life, may have made some very serious mistakes, and say, you know what? You are walking in perfection right now, and people just don't understand. Oh no, but I've made so many mistakes. I've done this, I've done that. I've sinned, I've made mistakes, I can't be perfect. No, you are perfect in that sense, and let's talk about that. So I like to use the example of an acorn, okay? What is a perfect acorn? First of all, let me tell you what a perfect acorn is not. Let's talk about what a perfect acorn is not. A perfect acorn is not the largest one. It's not the prettiest. It's not the juiciest. It's not the one with the perfect little cap on the top of it. It's not the first one to fall from the tree, and it's not the last one to fall from the tree. What a perfect acorn is a healthy, mature oak tree, because that's what an acorn is designed and intended to be. Is as it goes through its process, the final result is it's supposed to be a healthy, mature oak tree. So if God is planting acorns, us as acorns, he doesn't plant us and a year later come down and look at us and say, oh my gosh, I want a fully mature, developed oak tree. He expects to see in us an acorn that was planted a year ago. So it's going to be an itty bitty tree, about little plant about this tall. And if he comes back in 5 years, it's going to be whatever tall. I don't know how fast your acorn trees grow where you are, but he does not expect, because it hasn't had the time to develop, and we haven't. We need time to develop. Also, as a gardener, if I were to go out and plant an acorn or plant a tree, there's so many things I need to consider. What purpose do I want this tree? Why am I planting this tree? Do I want it to prevent erosion? So I plant a tree with a lot of strong roots. Do I want this tree to be a windscreen or even a sight screen, a visibility screen? Do I want this tree to provide fruit? What kind of fruit do I want? Do I want nuts? Do I want cherries, apricots, peaches, apples? What have you? What do I want in this tree? And where am I going to plant it? The planting is also very, very important. So where will I plant it? Is it going to get a lot of water? Is it going to get a lot of sun? And I have my own purpose. And each tree is very different from the other, and I will plant them in different places. And if we look at that and think about perhaps God's intent with us. And again, if you're not a church-going Bible study in person, that's fine. I want you to understand the psyche of our society. This is what much of it was based on. And perhaps you can see, you know what, I inherited, or a lot of these things were taught to me growing up, even though my parents may or may not have been church-going folk or Bible studying folk. That's still part of our cultural, whatever you want to call it, the cultural thing, whatever that is. So, you have all these trees planted, and they're all for different purposes. And you don't see the shade tree over here talking to the fruit tree, going, oh my gosh, you're so tiny, or you have such delicious fruit, and I've got nothing but all these leaves. They each have these purposes, and yet how often do we find ourselves comparing ourselves to our neighbor without ever stopping to consider that God may have had a very different idea in mind of what He wants us to be, what He wants us to be fully developed into. We're not all to be fully developed into the exact same cookie cutter pattern of a fully developed acorn tree, so to speak. God has a very distinct purpose for each one of us. And yet we compare ourselves to other people. At the same time, if I take and plant a tree, it's like I want this tree to be totally natural. And so I plant it out where it's not going to get irrigation. It's going to depend on rainfall and just the natural elements for its fertilizer, for the water it gets. I don't expect that tree to grow as fast as one that was started inside of a greenhouse, for example, and then transplanted to the perfect spot with all the great watering and fertilizer and such. They're going to look very different. And yet I don't go and judge a tree that maybe I planted or that was planted out in the wilderness, out in the woods. I don't judge it the same as a nursery planted tree. I say, you know what, for this tree out here in the woods on the side of the mountain, it's mature, it is doing well, it is teleos, it's perfect for the environment that it's in. If this tree went through several years of drought, do I expect it to look the same? No. What if it was on the side of a mountain and during the winter a large avalanche came down and bent all the trees over? And I come back and I check that tree and it's all bent over and almost broken, and it's not doing very well, it's not very healthy. Do I blame the tree and say, you should be standing up tall and have all perfect branches and great symmetry? No, I say, you know what, this tree is doing the best it can with what it has and with the environment that it's in. This is a perfect tree, all bent over and struggling to stay alive. I live in Harriman, Utah. The last few years, we had some serious mountain fires out here, and 2 years ago, we had a real fire that come raging down through and actually took out a couple of homes in our neighborhood. There's a lot of what we call scrub oak around here. It's little oak trees that maybe grow the yay high, a little bit higher at times, but it takes years and years to grow, and that's as high as they get, maybe 10, 12 feet when they're fully mature. Well, that was 2 years ago. Last year, the year after the fire, I took a ride on my ATV up through the mountains around my house here, up through this area that was burned, and it was so sad to see all these oak trees, this scrub oak, that was just burned stalks sticking up out of the ground, 6, 8, 10 feet, whatever it was, and see them absolutely dead and nothing on them. But as I got closer to them and examined and started walking through them, down on the ground, very small, I see little leaves and little branches sprouting up right out of the ground, right out of the base of the trunk of that old tree. The tree that had been burned. Do I blame that tree for only having leaves this tall after being there for years and years and years on the mountain? Absolutely not. That tree is perfect. It's been through a fire and still it continues to live, to struggle, to try to move forward. And I believe this is what God had in mind for us. That regardless of our circumstance, that we're always on the path, that we're trying to do a little bit better, to be a little bit more, to each day be a little bit better than we were yesterday. But yet we put this expectation on ourselves that we need to be perfect right now and never make a mistake and be a fully grown tree. That's unreasonable when you think about it in that light. And I think it would be unreasonable, and I don't believe that God expected us to be perfect from one instance to the next. We're not designed that way. That's the whole purpose for Jesus Christ. From the religious standpoint. So, that's what I wanted to explain to you today. So even if you don't come from a religious background and you're just looking at it on a psychological thing, my parents expected perfection of me. And I feel like I have to be perfect myself. Just think about the analogy of the acorn tree, okay? What an acorn tree. An oak. Think about an analogy of an oak tree. What is that expected to be? What conditions has it been? Or perhaps we're a different kind of seed, a different kind of tree. Okay, we don't all have to be the same. Let's quit comparing ourselves to other people. Let's just try to do a little better today than we did yesterday, and do a little bit better tomorrow. And move on. And if we make a mistake, it's okay. It's something to learn. Gosh, now we know, hopefully, what not to do again. It's not the end of the world. we can still keep going on and on. That's my hope, and that's the information that I have for you today. I hope that you'll use it. I hope that it helps you. If you would like more information about this, first off, go to our website, www.allthingspossible.biz, right here at the bottom of the screen, and sign up for the free 7 traits to having all things possible in your life. There's some great information there. Really good, valuable stuff. I hope that you'll get that and go through that. Also, if you would like, either email Kris, where it says contact us. Go to that and say that you would like a free strategy session, either with Kris or with myself as an energy healer. And that's a broad term, but to remove emotional blockages, find things that are holding you from moving forward. And we'd love to offer you a free strategy session to talk about what we can possibly do to help you with that. Thanks for visiting us today. Thanks for coming to All Things Possible TV. I hope that you'll tune in again and check out our other episodes that we have recorded previously. There's lots and lots of really good stuff, good information on each one, and we share that with you, hoping to bless your life as this information has blessed ours as we have learned these things. Thanks for coming. Have a good day, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.